in the entire United States of America. 50 times as much cancer per person as the nation as a whole. This is another consequence of continuing this ridiculous and suicidal dependence on fossil fuels. Now, the health disparity, the median age is more than 6 years lower. Look at Pittsburgh. Here are some examples from Pittsburgh, Steel City, and you can see the particulate pollution again going to these areas, and predominantly a lot of it goes into the areas where black, brown, and indigenous people live, and the life expectancy there has gone down as well. Tell them about Jane Burston.
Thank you. So in the United States, in some cases, these data have already been available, but for many countries in the world, this is brand new information. So that's why we're excited with support from Clean Air Fund to be able to look into these air pollution and environmental justice issues on a global scale. And so to give you an example, in every different country around the world, we've been able to track for the first time where is non-greenhouse gas emissions coming from, and we're beginning to model what neighborhoods are breathing that. So these are actual airflows. This is hourly information about the direction of wind speed at that time, modeling out literally who was breathing what pollution from these facilities around the world. And what we see is there are systematic patterns of disparity at every scale. So for example, in the EU, we are not used to talking as much about disparity between EU member states, but Denmark is significantly wealthier than Poland per capita, and we see very, very similar patterns in the data at this scale. So in Poland, we see a much higher concentration of coal plants and other coal-burning facilities, and if you are living in one of these plumes, your exposure to these pollutants is significantly different in nearby, wealthier Denmark. We see similar patterns at every scale, but just for a sense of what that means, a baby born in Warsaw, Poland today, 1,000 cigarettes worth of pollution they will breathe in their first year of life. That's a very different outcome than someone living in Denmark for a very similar set of economic circumstances. And we also find this in the developing world where there has been less science done to date. So for example, we're looking at a region in South Africa that has intense concentration. 100% of all coal plants in this heavily coal-dependent country live in the same region. That's Mpumalanga province, which translates to land of coal in Zulu. And so it is one of the less wealthy areas within a country that has fewer resources. It has a higher population, it has a higher black population than, for example, Western Cape province, which is wealthier. And we see similar disparities of emissions intensity and exposure to pollutants within the country. And so across states, across countries, across continents, we see this systematic relationship in the data between wealth, often race, and exposure to pollutants.
And by the way, you know, this whole debate over carbon markets, I'm not going to get into it. They have to play some role, and you'll sort out the details. But here's what cannot be allowed to happen. You can't tell people who are living with this flow of particulate pollution driving the cancer rate 50 times higher, oh no, we're all good because we're planting some trees in another country. You have to continue living with this pollution. This problem needs to be addressed in a holistic way. But what we can do is actually focus on the developing countries and prioritizing where we cite the new clean energy facilities. Some of the more responsible companies around the world are actually gaining credits and benefits and reputation by building new renewable energy facilities in the areas where it will do the most good and reduce the most emissions. If you're building a new energy facility in a place that already has it, then that's something else. But look at this. The single state of Florida has more solar panels than the entire continent of Africa. This is a disgrace. This is a disgrace for our world community. Africa has 60% of the solar potential of the entire world. Africa has solar potential that is 400 times greater than the potential of all of the fossil fuel reserves they think are located in Africa. And yet, this pitiful result because they're walled off from access to private capital on equal borrowing rates so they can participate in this clean energy revolution. We need to change this on an urgent basis because it's getting worse. If you look at the developed countries, the global warming pollution is going down. In the developing countries, it's going up. 100% of the increased emissions going forward are going to be in the developing countries. If you look at the particulate pollution, the same pattern. Going down in the wealthy countries, still going up in the poor countries. We have to fix this. If you look at where you can site a new renewable energy facility, this is an interesting graphic here. The blue thing, that shows avoided emissions. If you put a brand new solar facility in this area near Joburg, then you are avoiding a lot of greenhouse gas pollution. If you put it in Los Angeles or in California, it's a good thing, you want to do that, but you're not getting the benefit of reducing the global emissions in the same way that you will by focusing on the developing countries. Some companies are doing this. I'm very proud of Apple. I used to be a part of Apple for 21 years. They are using climate trace data in order to site new renewable energy facilities in areas of the world where it will result in the largest reduction in global warming pollution. And of course, that also reduces the particulate pollution. And a lot of the people that we've been working with are very kind. Project Drawdown, which you all know very well. You know Jonathan very well also.
Yeah, so I've always been a fan of Project Drawdown's approach of what climate solutions work better than others. And so we're excited to be working with Drawdown as one of the folks looking at this data to say how can we move faster by choosing particular projects, particular locations, using data like this to move faster with the same resources. And so just to give you an example of how this works, we can see with climate trace data, Berkeley County, South Carolina, we see the same heavy concentration of coal plants that have always been there. But a different region, Council Bluffs, Iowa, we can see from space solar panels going in and coal plants being converted to parks. But both of these have data centers, and so if you were to use data and electricity in Iowa, you are now adding less pollution than if you were to do the exact same thing in Berkeley County, South Carolina. And so we're starting to work with different users. One of the most interesting is 2 Sigma, a financial services firm in Wall Street that uses an enormous amount of artificial intelligence because they execute many, many trades daily. They have looked at climate trace data and been able to identify that by moving artificial intelligence use from one area to another, they can actually reduce the emissions in an overburdened community and barely cause an increase in the other community. And so there is an improvement in the climate potential, but also in equity and also in health. So we're really excited about applications like this to allow people to move faster and do better. Another example of a climate trace user that's very interesting is NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. So what they've figured out is the difference between the old system of looking at emissions in the atmosphere and assuming where resources happen versus actually detecting where real facilities are can increase the accuracy of climate models. For a sense of context, this is what most of the world's space agencies do when they are looking at emissions. They will look at how much is in the atmosphere and they will use a proxy to allocate where do we think that came from. The most famous example is nighttime lighting. So if you look from the Earth at night, you can see pretty well more or less where emissions are coming from because factories and cities are bright and forests are not. So this is a very common technique, but what NASA was able to figure out with this is that there are flaws in it. So that widespread technique, for example, can miss cases like the Alberta tar sands, where they cause 11 times more emissions than nearby Calgary, but at night they don't light up as much. And so if what you're doing is you're assuming that wherever the light is where the emissions are, you will get a pretty good sense of emissions, but we're working with them to get a better sense of emissions and to figure out exactly where is it coming from.
Yeah, and by the way, if you didn't, I don't want you to miss a salient detail. when NASA's climate modelers are saying the climate trace data is better than what they were using, and they're getting the best results by using climate trace, that's kind of a validation in my view, because I really respect those women and men at NASA. Let me go back to this. These are some of the users of climate trace data, and we're working with C40 and the Interparliamentary Union, the Under 2 Coalition, and you can read for yourself. The Climate Reality Project, Phyllis Cutno, our president and CEO, is here. We're going to have a meeting later, and we're very proud to work with these users. Now, the governors of states and provinces have been key allies, and some of them have done an amazing job. I want to introduce one of them to you now and bring him out on stage. Governor Jay Inslee of the U.S. state of Washington is the most effective climate policy implementer in the entire United States among governors, and he just had a resounding victory in the election. Not everything in the election went the way I wanted it to go, but in Washington, they had a big victory in continuing this fantastic reduction of emissions. And Jay, come on out here and tell us what's in store.
This is fun.
Great.
This is fun.
Good. Yeah, it is.
I'm Jay Inslee. I'm governor of the state of Washington. We're in the northwest corner of the United States, represent 8 million people. And I just want to say this to start with. I have officially, with my wife, the 6 cutest grandchildren in North America. And their best friend is right here, Al Gore. Give it up for a guy who's only won 1 Nobel Peace Prize, but he's still doing some good work. I came to share 2 brief messages. Number 1, despite the election results at the White House last week, we are moving forward in America big time. We have momentum that will not be slowed down, will not be retarded, and I can do things in my state that I can tell you unequivocally that Donald Trump cannot stop, and his election will not stop the action in the United States of America. And the reason for this is that we have states, counties, cities, nonprofits, 5,000 in the Americas all in, 24 states in the U.S. Climate Alliance, the Beyond Oil and Gas Coalition, that are all in their own way working and making progress dramatically. And what Al just talked about, the climate deniers tried to repeal the nation's best cap and invest bill last Tuesday. We beat them 62 to 38. The climate deniers got their fannies whipped, okay? I just want to make sure you understand that. Second mention, I think the reason Al invited me to this, and it is an honor to be with him and his whole team. This trace technology, this plume technology is not a secret weapon, it is a supremely successful weapon in the war against climate change. And let me tell you why I say that. I'm a practicing politician. I've been in and out of it for 30 years. And we know something that's very true. And it harkens back to, if I can quote Muhammad Ali, is that okay to? I'm going to quote Muhammad Ali.
Like a butterfly.
Muhammad Ali says you can float like a butterfly, sting like a bee, but a man can't hit what he can't see. We now can see the enemy against us of CO2. We now can vector our energies against it. We can go to our constituents and show them in a graphical way it is hurting not some far-off distant continent on a far-off distant decade, but their own children. This is a tool to show the threat to our own children. And when they see this tool in city council races and community races all across the United States, politicians are going to have to yield to this technology. Seeing is believing. That's the news. I will tell you, America's in it. We're going to use Al's tool big time. So, Baku, we're with you.
Thank you, Jay. You take that with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Jay, you are absolutely great. And I want Gavin to tell you, here's an example of how we can use the climate trace data to prioritize the reduction of emissions to get the biggest bang for the effort.
So it's actually 2 ways. So the first thing we can do is we can detect now where are facilities that could be doing something better. So climate trace data has been able to find what we believe is every landfill in the world, and we can look at which landfills have been covered, which landfills have not been covered, and a key way to reduce methane is just literally don't have the trash going out into the open atmosphere. And so a simple thing you could do is we've been able to identify, for example, 100 sites, but you could do now 9,000 sites if you wanted. And just covering these just covering these 100 largest sites in the world would allow us to reduce over 2 million tons of methane pollution. But there's a second thing we can do. We can actually say, what if instead of going for the largest landfills, we went for the most impactful landfills? By looking at which landfills have not yet been covered, by looking at which landfills have a type of trash with a higher emissions factor, with the same effort, you can actually get 70% more methane reduction. Instead of going for the largest landfills, going for the landfills that we can do better. And what's really interesting is what we see in the pattern is it is no coincidence that those landfills are almost always in communities that are less wealthy. Why? Because we see a lot of patterns like this in the data. Depending on the technology type of that emitting facility, it has a different emissions factor. If you have a clay cover, that's even better for reducing methane than, say, a sand cover, which is cheaper. And so the richest areas will often have clay covers. They're a little bit better at reducing emissions. But the bulk of emissions come from the difference between doing nothing at all or doing the cheapest, simplest thing. And over in the data, what we see is that overburdened communities where there have been no resources is where nothing at all has been done. And the fastest way to reduce GHG emissions is to put resources in these communities, which will also heavily reduce the pollution burden that causes disease. Just to give you an example of how this relationship works. So this is a map of different landfills around the world. Let's look at this landfill in Lagos, Nigeria, that is completely uncovered, an extremely high emissions factor. You can visually see why. Nothing has been done. Let's compare this with a landfill in Kentucky that has been covered with a cement and has a very low emissions factor. It doesn't even really matter which of these landfills is bigger. By detecting from space which of these nothing has been done and something has been done, we can accelerate climate progress by making smarter investments. And we find a very consistent pattern that it's often about wealth.
Yeah, well, look, to do a brief overview of methane, of course, it's the second biggest problem. CO2 is the biggest, but methane deserves much more attention. And these are the sources of human-caused methane. And you can see fossil fuel extraction and related activity is the worst. Waste dumps, a big one. We just talked about that. And if you look at coal mining, even before the coal is burned, if it's just sitting there in a pile, the emissions of methane from the coal piles and the mines is twice as high as all international aviation combined. So that's an interesting detail. And of course, it's really significant because even though it has a shorter lifetime, each molecule of methane is 82.5 times as powerful in trapping heat. And that means that when it leaks in the fracking or production process and pipelines and the use, then it can be as bad or even worse than coal. So methane deserves a lot more attention. And it's getting more attention.
That's why we're excited there's so many new methane spotting satellites going up. And what's really interesting is we're starting to see the emergence of two classes. So new satellites like Carbon Mapper's Tanager 1 are highly, highly accurate and target at an individual facility. So if you point them at a highly emitting oil and gas leak, for example, you can get very actionable information. But about 99% of the methane emitting sources worldwide will never be observed by a targeted satellite like this. So by combining them with other information from Sentinel, GHGSat, Emit, and others, what we at Climate Trace can do is get a picture of all the methane emitting facilities in the world, and for each individual state, city, and inventory, we can say, what are your biggest things that you can do to reduce emissions? And that's the power of combining with many different data sets.
Yeah, and we use 300 satellites, and a lot of these other satellites that focus on individual targets are able to find what to look at by looking at the Climate Trace inventory. And as I say, we use satellites from, what, 6 different countries? 300 from maybe 8 different countries. I want to give a shout out to Will Marshall at Planet Labs, who's been particularly helpful to Climate Trace. Now, we had a global methane pledge in 2020. Well, What's happened? Well, methane emissions have gone up 5% since the methane pledge, so we really have to focus more attention on this. And obviously, this is a time for all of us to have an awakening. We need to think differently about this. We need to set our priorities differently, because the IEA tells us, you know this, we have all the technologies we need with proven deployment models to reduce emissions in half in the next decade. So we need to get busy and do it. The IEA has formulated a detailed plan. I'm not going to focus on every single one of these. You can read them afterwards. This is going to be available to you all, but I want you to know there is a detailed plan, and it's not a pie-in-the-sky, moonshot type adventure. These are all things that most of them we should be doing for other reasons anyway. We have a plan. We have the technologies. We have the proven deployment models. We need more political will, and I'll come back to that shortly. But the point is, we know how to do this. We know how to get to net zero. And globally, wind alone could provide 40 times as much electricity as the world uses every year. Solar, you may know this story. 22 years ago, the best projections were we could add 1 gigawatt of solar per year by 2017. We beat that goal by 17 times over. Last year, we beat it 445 times over. This is a breakout, near miraculous success story. Cheapest electricity in the history of the world. And by the way, if you look at why, the cost continues to come down. And China, in the first 10 months of this year, in every single month, China has deployed as much new solar electric capacity as would be provided by 18 1-gigawatt nuclear plants built every month. That's astonishing. They've doubled their rate over the previous year. So did the U.S., by the way, but from a lower base. This is a great success story. And if you rely on coal, it takes if you look at what you get from 100 coal ships, it would take only 50 LNG tankers. It only takes 1 container ship to deliver the solar PV modules that you would need to get the same electricity that you get from 100 coal ships. And once you get them and set them up, guess what? You have no annual fuel cost, no supply chain risk, no price volatility, and we get enough in 1 hour from the sun to fuel the entire global economy for an entire year. So it seems like a pretty easy choice. And it turns out to be that last year, if you look at all the new electricity generating capacity installed worldwide last year, 87% was clean energy. We are winning on this front. We have these tools, and carbon-free sources are now providing more electricity than either coal or methane gas. Electric vehicles, again, people say, well, the rate of increase slowed a little bit. Not much. They're really beginning to take over. Batteries are coming online and getting much cheaper. This is what's happened, and this is what is in the years just ahead. This is a $1 trillion industry unfolding right before our eyes. There was 1 gigafactory in 2016. Now, around the world, there are 240 gigafactories and another 161. There was one, now we have 400 either up or soon to be in the running. The investments in energy are twice as high in renewable energy as in fossil fuels worldwide, but that ratio, according to the IEA, needs to move to 10 to 1. And I hope we can do that as quickly as possible. But we're subsidizing fossil fuels still. It's insane, really, to force taxpayers around the world to subsidize the destruction of human civilization. What sense does that make? Obviously, none. We need to eliminate the direct and indirect subsidies. And by the way, I just have to make this point. We keep hearing, oh, emissions are not a problem. We can just suck the emissions back out of the air. We can catch them coming out of the smokestack as they're going up in the air. Or we can just build a giant mechanical vacuum machine. Well, come on. We get used to thinking that technologies all come down in price quickly and miraculously. Some do. Computer chips, you can choose your own examples. But many do not. and Oxford University did a survey of all these technologies, and they found that carbon capture and storage is an example of what they call a non-improving technology. For 50 years, there's been no reduction in cost. And of course, the direct air capture is just simply ridiculous. I mean, if you want to fall for that, I got a bridge I want to sell you. But if you look, oh, now, does this mean that there couldn't be a breakthrough? Maybe. I wouldn't bet on it if it hasn't happened in 50 years. And in the last 20 years, there's been a little bit of progress. I want to give them credit. 20 years ago, they were able to capture 4 hours worth of annual emissions, and now they're able to capture 11.9 hours of annual emissions. How does that compare to the actual emissions? So those two little pathetic slivers on the left are what we're supposed to bet the future of humanity on in order to avoid doing anything that might reduce the burning of fossil fuels. And the fossil fuel industry that has spared no expense to try to capture the process, you know, they're way better at capturing politicians than emissions. They've gotten pretty good at capturing COPs also, by the way. But if we get to true net zero, the temperatures on Earth will stop going up almost immediately. 3 to 5 year lag. They used to think it would keep going with positive feedback loops. No, we can stop this. This is what you would call a thermostatic system. It is controlled by a thermostat, not a knob on the wall, but a set of decisions that regulate how much fossil fuels we're burning. We're still dialing that up, so we're turning the heat up. We can dial it down. It's thermostatic. We can do this. And if we get to true net zero and stay at true net zero, this is not well known. It is fantastic. We could see half of all the anthropogenic CO2 fall back out of the atmosphere in as little as 30 years. You talk about carbon removal. Passive, nature-based carbon removal is the strategy we need to follow. We just have to decide how long the world is going to cower in front of the financial and political power of the fossil fuel industry. If we can find it within ourselves in every country to come together and make intelligent choices, we can solve this. And as Jay Inslee said, yes, we had an election in the U.S., but here's why he says they won't be able to stop. When Trump was president last time, the solar and wind expansion and EV continued anyway because economics are driving it and because state and provincial and city governments and companies are driving it. We're seeing 100,000 jobs already created and in the works in the U.S. because of the legislation to stop climate. And worldwide, we're seeing the rapid rise in clean energy jobs overtake dirty energy jobs. And we're seeing people all around the world continue to demand that we respect their future. And that's why we are so excited to share this data from Climate Trace with you. We invite you to go to the website. And is it expensive to get this data?
It's free.
It's free. Go to your website, Climate Trace. We raise the money, and no fossil fuel money is involved, just from people who want to solve the climate crisis. Now, let me say one final word. All of you here play key roles in determining whether or not we solve this. Thank you. Do not be discouraged by any temporary political setbacks. We have to do this. We have no choice. We can do this. We have the technologies, the models, the policies. We know what works. The only thing that is any doubt in some people's minds is political will. But you know, every morally based movement in human history has gone through periods of despair when the advocates felt, oh my gosh, will we ever be able to do this? At a comparable moment in the civil rights movement, Martin Luther King Jr. in my country spoke up and he said, keep going. If you can't fly, run. If you can't run, walk. If you can't walk, crawl. But keep going forward. And if you doubt for one moment that we have the political will necessary, remember, political will is itself a renewable resource. Thank you very much. Good job. Let's take a bow. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, we'll go off.
Muraho neza, nitwa Isheshi. Ngiye kubagezaho amakuru y'iteganyagihe mu buryo bwihariye. Nk'uko mubibona, kuva hejuru kugera hano hasi, hari ibyago bidasanzwe. Nitutumvira inama z'abahanga mu bumenyi bw'ikirere, ibintu bizarushaho kuba bibi mu gihe cyacu. Reka turebe ukuntu bizaba byifashe muri 2050. Ubushyuhe buzagira ingaruka ku bana 94%, bitume gukinira hanze biba amateka. Amapfa azakuraho burundu igihingwa cy'ingano, kandi umugati nicyo kintu murumuna wanjye akunda cyane. Si ibyo gusa kandi, ibiza bizatuma imisoro yongerwa kugera kuri tiriyoni 6 z'amadolari. Ikibabaje ni uko ibyo byose biterwa n'imyuka mibi ihumanya ikirere mwohereza kandi bidakwiye. Ariko ntimwihebe, haracyari amahirwe yo kugira ikirere cyiza. Imikoreshereze y'ingufu zidahumanya iri gukwira hose, uhereye iburasirazuba kugeza iburengerazuba, kandi inarema imirimo myinshi. Ibiciro by'ibikomoka ku mirasire y'izuba byaragabanutse kurusha gazi na peteroli, bituma imiryango yizigama amafaranga yo kugura amata y'abana. Tugiye kuri satelite, biragaragara ko izi sisitemu z'abakuze zishobora kuturinda ibi byago. Gusa politike zihinduka buri munsi, ariko ntabwo zanganya ingufu n'inkubi y'umuyaga. Tuzakomeza tubahe amakuru mu gihe tugisuzuma niba abantu bakuru barekeraho guta umwanya, maze bakita kuri iki kibazo kigomba gukemurwa vuba. Kuko iyo atari amakuru y'iteganyagihe gusa kuri twe, ahubwo ari ahazaza hacu.
Be cool, it isn't a joke to walk in the woods, without all the smoke. I love to swim, but not in a flood. We can't grow a crop, down in the mud. I want to be cool and get the job done, so we don't get left out to bake in the sun. Let's plant some trees and make some shade from the ground up. That's how change is made. I want to be cool, how about you? Together there's not one single thing that we couldn't do. Take care of the earth and each other too. Working together, we all can be cool. I want to be cool, it's gotten too hot. I'm joining the movement to save what we've got. So every girl and every boy can live a good, long, healthy life and find some joy. care of the earth and each other too. Working together, we all can be cool. Leaders, it's time to lead. Listen to your people in need. The whole world is sweating this out. Can't you hear your kids starting to shout? I wanna be cool, how about you? Together